scripture reading today is 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 22 through 24. That's 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 22 through 24. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, who performed great exploits. He struck down 2 of Moab's best men. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down an Egyptian who was 7.5 feet tall. Although the Egyptian had a spear like a weaver's rod in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He too was as famous as the 3 mighty men.
Good morning. What a beautiful day to be in the presence of God's children, together in fellowship and in love with one another, building a family that is on its way home. So thankful for the opportunities we have to join together. If you're visiting with us from our community or one of the surrounding communities, we want you to know that you're welcome and wanted right here at the Brighton Church of Christ. We love the opportunity to serve you, to help you, to minister to the needs that you might have if you will make them known to us. And if you're looking for a church family, here it is. We welcome you home. We mentioned that as we were starting this morning about Wayne Manzanares' obedience to the gospel, being baptized for the remission of his sins this past Friday morning. We're so thankful, Wayne. I can't see the expression on your face because the light behind you is so bright coming through the windows there, but I'm sure it's a big smile on his face. And so thankful for the studies that we have had through the years, and the friendship that he and I have built, and but mostly thankful that he has made that great decision. And I know that his friends and his families welcome him and encourage him during this time as well. And also, I think last Sunday evening we mentioned that Mike and Jan Lorenzo had placed membership with us. Their address is also in the bulletin, and it's always good to see them. Mike works out at the airport and makes sure the runways are safe to land on, and so he's got a very important job, especially when I'm flying. And and mention also the youth Devo and ice skating event coming up on February 1st. Be looking in the detail or the bulletin for details to come in the future as well. Think about the stories and the legends that you love to hear, the bard's tales. They tell us of feats of strength and bravery, like Samson, who stood between the pillars and sacrificed his life, but in his death killed more than in his own life. They tell the stories of David's 3 toughest soldiers retrieving the waters of Bethlehem, and Shamgar, the judge, who killed 600 men in battle with a simple ox goad. Those stories, their exploits, they speed the heart. They excite adventure in us. They make us long for those days of greatness, of where strength and bravery are shown time and time again. But what made them so great was their dedication and commitment to the task at hand. Tolkien wrote of tales that really mattered, the ones that he said, stay in the heart. He said that folks in those stories had lots of chances, like us, of turning back, but they didn't. Tolkien's contemporary, 20th century theologian Clive Staples Lewis wrote a series of books introducing children to theology. The entire series was called The Chronicles of Narnia. The first book came out in 1950, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it told the tales of wickedness being vanquished by the sacrifices of the heroes of the stories. especially the Christological figure, Aslan, the majestic lion who chose death so that goodness would triumph. There's another epic tale that very few know about the lion, the pit, and the warrior. It's a tale which exalts the triumph of devotion, commitment, and dedication. The kind of life that we as Christians are called to live. In fact, Christianity, we would say, demands commitment and dedication of this style. Jesus would say in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33, "But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." These things were the things that we tend to have anxiety over, that we tend to worry about food and clothing and shelter, the very staples of life themselves. And yet Jesus is promising those things, those necessities will be given to you when we do what? When we seek first the kingdom of God, when we are committed and devoted to the King which we serve. "Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life," Jesus would say in Revelation 2 and verse 10. Or, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love Him." James 1:12. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only me, but also all those who have loved His appearing." 2 Timothy 4:7 and 8. Commitment, devotion, dedication. Sadly, there are many who turn back. They keep one foot in the world just in case Christianity gets too hard. One day a man started attending services. He came to see what it was all about, and he liked the sermon, and he returned again and again and again. Months passed and years passed, and yet he was there every time the church doors were open, and he was ready to worship God. And finally the preacher came to him one day and he said, "Isn't it about time that you renounce Satan and all of his ways?" The man thought about it for a little while, and he said, "No." And the preacher didn't understand, after so many years of attendance and hearing so many lessons of the gospel, why wouldn't he renounce? And he asked him, "Why won't you change your mind? Why won't you renounce the devil?" And he said, "Well, preacher, I just don't want to burn any bridges." There's a lot of people in this world that don't want to burn bridges. They hold on to the world. They hold on to what they've left. They always remember the old ways. Imagine Jesus' heart sinking there in John chapter 6 and verse 66, when it said, "After this, many of His disciples turned back and no longer walked with Him." Do you realize Jesus didn't watch those men and women turn back in John chapter 6? Many turned back during His ministry. Many turned back shortly after the cross, and many still turn back today. And Jesus watches each one walk away. Jesus knows their heart. Jesus loved them, and yet they turned their back. They gave up the salvation that He so willingly died to give to them. They turned back. They lacked the commitment and the devotion, the dedication to the King which we are called to serve. Or as Paul warned the Galatians, "But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to become once more?" When we turn from the King, it's not as if we go footloose and fancy free for the rest of our lives. When we turn from the King, we give up the freedom that He has offered to us to enslave ourselves in the sin which He bought us out of in the first place. God has always admired mighty men who were dedicated to His cause, men who were willing to fight, and when the circumstances were less than ideal. Take that as total commitment. Consider the life of Benaiah, one of David's mighty men of valor. There in 1 Chronicles that Mike read for us this morning in chapter 11, beginning in verse 22, it says, "And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds." Isn't that enough for us to admire this man? A doer of great deeds. He was a valiant man, meaning that in the face of discouraging odds, he was one who would step forward. He was not cavalier about his bravery, but he was confident in his bravery because of who stood behind him. Because he knew God was on his side. And it goes on to speak of some of his exploits. He struck down 2 heroes of Moab. It's interesting, the word heroes here is very similar to the word lion. In fact, it's a form of the word lion. And a lot of translations say that he struck down 2 lions of Moab. But it's more like the idea of a lion-like man. To have the ferocity and the strength. They were the heroes of Moab because these were Moab's Benaiahs. These were Moab's mighty men of valor, and yet he stood up and he struck down 2 of them. He also went down and struck a lion in a pit on a day and when snow had fallen. And he struck down an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits tall or 7.5 feet tall. The Egyptian had in his hand a spear like a weaver's beam. Surely no one could vanquish this man. It's reminiscent of Goliath and David. Huge monster of a man. And the idea that he holds within his hand a spear like a weaver's beam. It's not just describing what he looks like. This is a man who wields a spear and knows how to use it. He is ready to kill his own enemies with this spear. But it says Benaiah went down to him with a staff and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand. Killed him with his own spear. We go back to verse 22, a doer of great deeds. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside the 3 mighty men. A doer of great deeds that struck down 2 heroes of Moab, that killed a giant Egyptian with his own spear. His exploits won him a name beside the 3 mighty men, Jashobeam, Eleazar, and Shammah, David's mighty men of valor. But I want to focus on the deed that is almost overlooked, that he went down and struck a lion in a pit on a snowy day. Do you know that statement means this was a man that was committed, was dedicated, that had great devotion. Let's look and see how that deed teaches us about commitment. Let's begin with the lion. The lion was representative of danger, of terror. He was the king of beasts, known as a vicious predator. His legendary roar summons terror from someplace so deep in our souls that we don't even know where it is from. If you've ever been at the zoo, or maybe you were lucky enough to be on safari and hear the lion's roar, songs have been written about it. Poems have been written about it. People are afraid of just the roar of the lion. And the Bible uses the lion's image to symbolize great strength, for example, in the tribe of Gad from the book of Deuteronomy 33 and verse 20. Uses the lion as a symbol of terror to the people in Samson's day and his great riddle in Judges 14, 7 through 18. The lion represents great bravery of the heart of those who would melt at David's attack in 2 Samuel 7. Justice against the unnamed prophet in 1 Kings 13. The lion would lay in wait as an ambush against people in Psalm 10 and verse 9. All of these work because of the natural traits of the lion himself, his strength, his predatory nature, the fear with which men and women looked at him. With such ferocity, let me ask the question, which of us would jump into a pit with a lion? Someone who trusts the God would save him. That's who would jump in that pit. Benaiah recognized the lion as an enemy, and with God on his side, he was determined to destroy that enemy. Because, as we say, if God be for us, who can be against us? Or maybe in this case, what animal could stand against us if God is on our side? Later, when the prophet Daniel disobeyed the king and was cast into the lion's den, Daniel relied upon this same God with this same power to save him from the mouth of the lions in Daniel chapter 6. Today, the devil continues to be our enemy. Peter says, be sober, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. 1 Peter 5:8. Think about that. Peter now uses this symbol of strength and terror and bravery and justice to describe our enemy because of his terror, because of his ferocity, because of his commitment to the task of killing his prey and devouring what he catches. That's who we are up against. And there's danger. He is seeking someone to devour. He's looking at me. He's looking at you. He's looking at our friends. He's looking at our neighbors. And he's dedicated to his task. We need to be ready to fight him and his temptations. As Paul said, to put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, the sexual immorality, impurity, passions, evil desires, and covetousness, which is idolatry, Colossians 3 and verse 5. He would remind us, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places, Ephesians 6 and verse 12. God fights for us. As we mentioned Romans 8 and verse 31, if he's fighting for us, who can be against us? Or 1 John 4 and verse 4, he that is in you is greater than he that is in the world. God stands behind us. The danger is real. It is clear. It is present in our lives because of our sin. But God has made a way for us to vanquish the devil, to overcome the dangers, to stand victorious as more than just conquerors in this life. Then there's the pit. If the lion represents danger, I would say the pit represents for us dedication, because the pit is a place of no retreat. When Benaiah jumped into the pit with the lion, he knew that only one of them would make it out alive. Either he would vanquish the feared beast, or the beast would devour him, but only one was coming out of that pit. A lot of people hear the gospel, but when they start to count the cost, the price is too high. They don't want to make the commitment of jumping into a pit with a lion. Maybe they don't trust God to fight for them. Or maybe they're still too in love with the world. How many times have you seen those sample Christianity? I tell people a lot of times when I baptize them, I'll say, don't dip your toe in the water. Don't test the waters. Be like that kid running down the dock and jumping wholeheartedly into the lake. He doesn't know if the water's hot. He doesn't know if the water's cold. All he knows is he's going all in. And that's how we ought to do Christianity. We don't dip our toe in the water and say, oh, well, it's too cold. Oh, it's not cold enough. You just run and jump in. Because Christianity is about total commitment. Don't look at the pit and say, well, I can't retreat from that. I guess I won't get in. Benaiah jumped into the pit with a lion. Others will hear the gospel and obey it, but they try to keep one foot in the world. They try to straddle eternity in the gulf between heaven and hell. Like those of the last days that Paul wrote about in 2 Timothy 3. He said, "For people will be lovers of self and lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness, but denying its power." Avoid such people. Why? Why, Paul, should we avoid those kinds of people? Because those are the kinds of people that if we run with them, then we will begin to act like them. Our association with them is to pull them out of such sin, of such separation from God, to teach them to love God rather than the things of this world. Obedience and faithfulness and commitment demand no retreat. All in, full throttle, dedication to God. That's the pit. And then there's the warrior. If the lion is danger, represents danger, and the pit represents dedication, then I would say that the warrior himself represents determination. A lot of people look at Christianity, but hold off because the conditions aren't quite right. Growing up, there was a man in the congregation we grew up in who never would obey the gospel. He believed in God. He believed that the way he grew up in a denomination was wrong, and he knew what to do in order to obey the gospel, but he did not obey the gospel because he was afraid his family would not approve. He was 40 years old and wouldn't make that step because he didn't think the conditions were quite right. There's some people who look at their lives and they say, "I like that Christianity, I like what you're putting out there, but let me get my life right first." If I could remove that phrase from the English language. We don't get our lives right. In fact, all we've ever done was got our lives wrong. We come to Christ to get our lives right. Bring Christ your broken life so marred by sin, right? He will create anew and make whole again. That's the whole point. Some people look at the conditions, they say, "I'm not ready to give up my way of life yet." They're still too infatuated with things of the world or the habits that they have latched onto, and they're not ready to say, I give those things up. They're not ready to have that change of heart about sin. The conditions are not right. Or some people, they say, "Well, I think I'm okay with how I am. I don't need to change. Look, I've done enough good in my life that God will surely save me." How many people think that salvation is a transactional account? That if we have enough in the black ledger or the black side that outweighs the red marks of sin, then we'll be okay. That's an interesting proposition, isn't it? How bad is a lie? I mean, if we're going to put it on a scale of justice, how much does a lie weigh? 10 pounds? So you have to have what? 11 pounds of goodness to outweigh one lie? First of all, you're not going to find this whole formula in the Bible. It's not there. But let's just say that you could somehow outweigh the bad with the good. How much does your bad weigh? And how good is the good? You see, what does it take to overcome one lie? One gift to a poor person of a meal? Take one meal to a poor person or a homeless person? Letting a homeless person stay in your house for 5 days, is that enough to overcome one lie? And the answer is, you can't overcome one lie. If everything you did for the rest of your life was good and right and righteous and blessed by God, it's not enough to outweigh that one lie. There's only one thing you can put on the other side of that scale that will weigh it down, that will overcome those bad things, that one lie. And that's the blood of Christ. And a lot of people will come and they're just not that determined because the conditions aren't right. Solomon would say in Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 4, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. When you're waiting for just the right conditions, what you're looking for will never get done. If you think, why I can't go out and plant today, it's too windy. So tomorrow you get up and you think, okay, today's the day I'm going to plant. And you go outside and there's clouds outside. Well, I can't plant today. It might rain. I'll wait one more day. And so the next day you get up and it's the hottest day of the year. Well, I can't plant today. I'd die of a heat stroke. I'll do it tomorrow. If you're waiting for the perfect conditions, they never come. But look at Benaiah. He saw the beast and knew it needed to be dealt with. It was in a pit where there was no backing out if things went south. Look, once he jumped in, that was it. But it was a snowy day. Most men wouldn't commit on a sunny day to that task. But on a day that is cold, when the snow has muddied the ground and the pit may have standing water or worse, ice in the bottom of the pit. Have you ever felt days like that, cold, where the wind numbs your hands so much you can't tell if it's gripped around the hilt of your sword or not? Where your breath is trapped just outside of your face as the warm air is frozen in just a moment. Days that were so cold that the chill bit deeper than the lion's jaw. It was the worst possible enemy in the worst possible place with the worst possible conditions. Benaiah legitimately could have looked into the pit and said, well, just don't feed him, he'll die in about 7-8 days. He could have looked in that pit and said, you know what, let's wait till that water thaws out, when I can get better traction for wrestling a lion. Benaiah looked into the pit. He saw what needed to be done, and he jumped in. That's determination. That's what God calls us to. That's what it takes to be one of God's mighty men, a chosen one. Dedication and determination in the face of danger. What kind of person am I? Would I look at the danger of living Christ and walk away? Am I the kind that would see the pit and walk away because there was no way out? Would I size up the conditions and say, not today, I'll wait till a better day? Or would I jump in a pit with a lion on a snowy day? What kind of person are you? Have you sized up the salvation or the situation? Do you know your sins? You understand the way of salvation, and now you just need to jump in by obeying the gospel. You believe Jesus is the way, then jump in. You believe Jesus is the Lord, the Son of God, and you're ready to be baptized, jump in. Maybe you've fallen away and your commitment is not what it used to be. You're not sure that you can live up to God's expectations. Look, jump in. God has your back. You can do all things because Christ is there to strengthen you. Will you obey the good news? Will you take hold of the gospel this morning and make it yours by answering His invitation while we stand and while we sing?